Hello and welcome back to the sixth episode where we today are going to be talking a little bit more about the conceptual modeling. What this episode is going to be about is relationships and cardinality. Before we dive right into it, I'm going to start by recapping what we have said in previous videos about this topic. So if you remember, a relationship is the entanglement of two entities through the facilitation of primary and foreign keys. These keys are referencing another table, and by extent they are creating this relationship between our entities. If one table has a primary key, then it has a relationship with another table. The primary key from table 1 is going to be a foreign key in table 2. The relationship is usually depicted using a line, which then have a cardinality applied to it to show the user how it is connected to the other entity. We are going to dive deeper into this as further we go into this episode. But before we do that, we're going to be looking at a much simpler relationship notation. So, when we map up a relationship such as this, we always want to show what the relationship is to make sure that it is a logical relationship. So every relationship that you do in a conceptual model should be accompanied by a description of that said relationship. And as you can see here on the screen, we have a car to the left and we have a person to the right. And a person has a relationship with the car. And what that relationship is that a person owns the car. Now, the car obviously have a relationship with the person as well, as far as the car is registered to a person. Now, these simple sentences describe the nature of the relationship between them, and the reason we are doing this is to ensure that all relationships are valid and should be put into place. So, with that said, we're going to move further into relationships and look a little bit more at cardinality. Cardinality is the measure of how many of an entity that can be connected to one occurrence of the other entity. And if we continue with our car example as here, it might just look a little something like this. So, as you can see, you still have the car to the left and the person to the right. So the car to the left, as you can see, has 3 small lines connecting the box with a dot. Now what we call this is to say that a person from the right can own 0, which is the dot, or more, which are those 3 prongs. So a person can own 0 or more vehicles or cars. And as you can see back at the person, there is 2 vertical lines. What this means is that a car can be registered to one and only one person. Now, I am unaware of how it is where you live and if this statement that I've said is true, but here, where I live in Sweden, it's the way that it is handled. So we would say that the cardinality between these two would then be that a person has 0 or more cars and a car have only one owner. Now, during this course, I'm going to use the crow's foot notation to display my models, but you can choose from many different ones, such as IdeaFix, Bachman, Min-Max, or UML. It all depends on what you feel most comfortable with using. I'm going to be using, like I said, crow's foot notation, which is, the name comes from the 0 or more cardinality that's attached to the car, which is supposed to look like a crow's foot. All of these different types of notations, they show cardinalities differently, but the meaning of them is exactly the same. So there is no difference between the meaning, it's just how you show it on the screen to others. We've spoken a little bit about cardinality. It's time for you to understand a little bit more about this. So we can have a look at this, where you can see you have 4 different types of cardinalities. Now, this is only an end point or a beginning point at one of the sides. So, as you can see at the top, we have something called 1 and only 1. Now, what this could be is that previous example we had where we said a car could be owned by one and only one person. The second one we have here is called a one-to-many cardinality. And what we might have here, let's say we have a company and we have salespeople, and we say that each salesperson that comes to our company is required to have one or more vehicles. So by that extension, we would say a person can have one or more vehicles. Or we might just employ people and say, if you don't want to use our cars, that's fine. And then we would have this, which is they can have 0 or more, or as it says here, many vehicles or cars. But the last one also tells you that we can have something called 0 or 1. So maybe if we are manufacturing cars and we say we haven't really shipped them off yet, so they're not registered to anyone, we could say that a car can have 0 or 1 persons attached to it. It's the same thinking. All of these cardinality types that you have seen here, what we do is we have to sit down and think real hard about what type of cardinality that's attached to each entity when it comes to the relationship between two entities, because the way that we model these cardinalities is going to impact the way we develop the database. Now these are all symbols for the cardinality, but we're going to go one step further now. We're going to look at a few relationships as well. So a one-to-one relationship, it can be this instance where we say that the person can have one and only one brain. So if a person doesn't have a brain, they're not a person. They have to have one brain. And by extension, we can say that a brain has to have one and only one person for it to exist. Usually what we try to do when we find one-to-one relationships is we look at them and see if it's not actually the fact that we should just combine them into one single entity. One-to-many is the relationship that you should focus on trying to implement to your relational entity database, because this is basically what the relational entity database is built up of. It's entities that has one occurrence on one side and many on the other side. So here is the same one before with the car and the person. What we say here is that a person can have many cars, but a car can only have one owner. So we have a one-to-many relationship. So many-to-many relationships, these are not something that we implement in a relational database. You might see these many-to-many relationships on a conceptual model. As soon as you start to build up your logical model, you will encounter something called normalization. And within normalization, we try to make these many-to-many relationships disappear. This is what a many-to-many relationship can look like, where you have a person can have 0 or many stocks, and a stock can belong to 0 or many persons. So there is a possibility for both sides to have many occurrences, whereas we want in a relational entity database to limit this to one-to-many relationships. But it's still important for you to know the difference between those. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for watching this episode, and I'll hope to see you next time again.